Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Television Podcast with Jay and Chris. Tonight we are talking about Chernobyl. This is the limited series event from HBO, and tonight we are talking about episode 2. This one is entitled Please Remain Calm.
Yes, it is.
All right, so this one we didn't get, some of the action, the explosion of the first episode. Everybody kind of starts to realize what's going on and the stakes that they're all being presented with.
Exactly.
All right, so for this limited series, we decided we're going to do beers instead of whiskeys. Tonight, Jay and I are drinking something different, and I have New Grist, and this is from Lakefront Brewery in Milwaukee. And this is actually a gluten-free beer, my first one, and it is very nice. It's super sweet.
Yep, that's a nice local brewery in Milwaukee, like you said. They have a lot of good beverages, so I'd suggest checking them out.
Mm-hmm.
And I am sticking with the New Glares theme again. This one is totally naked, and it's actually, I think, my favorite beer that they put out. Yeah, even more than Spotted Cow. So I highly recommend this to everybody out there. Go and check it out. So yes, this episode starts up 7 hours after the explosion. It's at the Belarusian Institute for Nuclear Energy, and the day starts off, the character's sleeping at the desk. It seems like she's been there all night doing some work. Her coworker comes in or opens the window, and all of a sudden their dosimeter alarm starts going off. Mm-hmm. So he closes it up right away, and that kind of starts this, this testing process and them trying to figure out what happened. She actually takes a swatch from the exterior of the glass and runs it through some of her laboratory equipment to determine what it is, and it comes back, she recognizes it right away that it's, uranium, and we got to start calling around to see where this came from. This isn't good.
Yeah, so between her and her coworker, they spend, the first few hours kind of on their own. There's no, news network that's reporting anything, or they didn't have the internet back then, so they're just trying to deduce where this came from, and they end up finding out by trying to call around to some of the nuclear power stations, and Chernobyl doesn't answer the phone, so they know something's wrong.
Well, that just goes to prove that the directors, everybody in the government, that was them suppressing the information. They're in the nuclear field. You would have thought that they would have gotten a heads up about what happened, but even they had no idea.
Yeah, and she mentions that, they're in Minsk, a big city, and she said, or her coworker says, could it have been a bomb we were testing? And she goes, no, our coworkers would have told us that because that's what they make here.
Yep.
So the fact that they didn't know anything about it yet was kind of interesting.
Yeah. So once that transpires, we kind of return back to Pripyat, and we see the hospital just getting overrun. All the ambulances are coming in. There's nowhere left to put the firefighters, everybody that's, got the radiation poisoning. And, family members are trying to get in. They're trying to figure out what's going on. So I think it's one of the more chaotic scenes of the episode.
Yeah, and we see one of the nurses figures out that, this is radiation poisoning they have. So, we need to take all their gear off and bring it down to the basement. And when they do that, you see the nurses kind of look down at their hands and realize they're being affected by this too.
Yeah, just handling the clothes and all the boots and everything that was there is burning them.
Mm-hmm.
But them being the primary caregivers, the nurses and doctors, they really don't have the option of not doing that.
Yeah,
they've got to treat them the best they can.
Yeah, and unfortunately, they weren't trained or didn't have the best protective gear for a situation like this.
Yeah, nobody warned them, and they didn't have anything to protect them. So it's kind of tragic, looking at it. They're doing the best they can, knowing that it's gonna hurt them in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Next up, we go to Legasov. He's been summoned to join this committee to deal with the explosion. And he's reading a report, and, you can see he's reading it and can't believe what he's reading. He goes into a meeting. There's Gorbachev and a bunch of other advisors there. And, they're all like, oh, well, it was only a reading of 3.6. Our understanding is everything is okay. The troops have it under control. That's it. And they're getting ready to call it a day, but he stopped them and said, no, this isn't right.
Yeah, in fact, he kind of jokes director, comrade Boris Sherbina, he kind of jokes that it's just the equivalent of an chest X-ray, and nothing to worry about. We got this handled. And as they're trying to leave the meeting, say okay, we're done with this. He can't take anymore. He just bangs his fist down on the table and says, "No, that's we got to talk about this. Something bad is happening."
Mm-hmm.
And at first, Gorbachev he's kind of mad at him for just speaking up, not giving him facts, acting irrationally. And Legasov kind of calms down and gives him some facts and some kind of worst case scenario, real life. He starts to listen and realizes it's not good.
Yeah, I think they portrayed Gorbachev as pretty level-headed, at least. He didn't completely dismiss him, but he was looking for evidence. He didn't want panic for the sake of panic.
Yeah, and some of the stats that he threw out to Gorbachev, he broke down, if the core exploded, what would happen, what's causing all this, and it was 3 million billion trillion radioactive atoms, basically like little mini bullets.
Each one is a bullet, yep.
Just going every direction, and it's going to tear through anything it comes across. And that was a really staggering stat on how much radiation was pouring out of that site.
Gorbachev tells Boris Sherbina, who's played by Stellan Skarsgård, who
Yes.
is a stellar actor. He's done a lot of amazing work, and just in this one episode alone, you could just see his facial expressions from the beginning of the episode to the end as he's slowly realizing what's happening to everybody. He just does a great job.
Yeah, I agree. He's a fantastic actor.
Yeah, so he tells Boris, hey, you need to go to Chernobyl and, look with your own eyes and see specifically, what is going on, what are the facts, because this whole issue came up from the description of a rock. And so he's like, you need to go there and see if this is true or not.
Right. Legasov is basically saying, hey, in this report, I'm thinking this is graphite, and the only place we can find graphite is directly around the core. And he said, all right, well, prove it, basically.
Mm-hmm.
You guys got to go there and, report directly back to me.
Yeah, he tells Boris that Legasov has to go with him because he knows how a reactor works.
And you could tell, at first he was, okay, yeah, I'll go there. I'll let you know. And almost, implying like, all right, I'll tell you I'm going to go there, but I'm not really going to fly there and risk it.
Yeah.
But then he's, has to be accompanied by Legasov, so he's a little bit more upset about that.
So the next scene we cut right away, and they're on a helicopter, and we get a pretty nice exposition piece about how those style of nuclear reactors work. And I think that's for us, the audience, but you do get a little bit of payback of him learning about that. Boris learns about it, and then right away when they land, he starts to share that knowledge that, you're not listening to the scientists, well, listen to me. These are these facts that I know, and the graphite can only be found one place. And
it really worked effectively.
Absolutely.
Because once again, the misinformation and the downplay was really prevalent. The managers and the directors at the facility were, even telling him that, there's nothing to worry about. We have it under control.
The first thing when they land is, all right, we have a report about who to blame for this. A fault report, and it's kind of funny, we have those at work too, so anytime anything goes out, there's a fault report to determine who's at fault for it. And
yeah, you got to pin it on somebody.
Yeah.
It just rolls downhill, as you know.
Mm-hmm. So then we go back to Minsk with Komyak, and we found out she's not a real life scientist, but they created a character as kind of a accumulation of all the different scientists in Russia that were working towards this.
Yeah, they touched on that on the behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Portion, just saying that it was really a collective, a whole group of scientists that obviously they couldn't portray everybody in the show, so they came up with this fictional character to kind of summarize that and give it another viewpoint on where the community stood as a whole.
Yeah, I think it's a smart decision because there's already so many different players and actors that we're having to track in this limited series that having to add 5, 10, or however many more that contributed would be a pretty tough ask.
Exactly.
So yeah, she's back in Minsk, but this time at the communist headquarters, trying to warn them about the findings that she has, and they don't want to believe her. They said, "Hey, the information we received says everything's okay. There's nothing to worry about." But we get a little bit more information from her too when she's leaving, talking to the secretary. She gives her a pack of iodine pills and tells her to take one a day, get away from the city, and she explains that the iodine will fill up your thyroid, which will block the radiation from being able to get in and cause cancer in there.
At this point, it's really the only thing the public can do to prevent as much radiation poisoning as possible. That and evacuating the cities. So you could tell she's really wanting to help the people and get as many lives saved as possible. But everybody she encounters at the start is downplaying it and not listening to her.
Yep. So we find out back in Chernobyl, they finally get a high dollar machine to read how much radiation is actually in the air, and they send it out to check on it. They first told us it was 3.6, and they find out it was actually 15,000.
Yeah, one of the major or the higher up military commanders, he volunteers basically to strap it to the front of a truck, wrap it in lead and drive it up next to the core.
Yeah, he's
and
got
get
the
a real
dosimeter
reading.
just right on the front of the truck there.
So that was a really cool scene. Once he returned back, them washing him down, washing the truck down, trying to get all the radioactive particles cleared as possible, and he said, yeah, it's 15,000 Rankine. That's
per hour.
Yeah, per hour.
Yeah.
It's not good.
No, it's not good at all. One good thing about this episode is they did a good job of explaining the timeline. So we started off at 7 hours. We've been kind of progressing throughout that day, and then we go to the later on, and we hit the 30-hour mark when they send for a bunch of helicopters.
Yes.
And actually all these helicopters came from Siberia. So I looked up a little bit of information on. So they sent them to bring a whole bunch of stuff from Siberia, so sand and boron, and a mix of other materials.
But yeah, he said that they needed 5,000 tons of sand and boron to start.
And it would have been less, but they said you can't fly directly over top
Most of
and
it's
drop
gonna
it straight
miss.
on there. Yep, exactly. And we see what happens when one does fly over top.
I think just the heat and the smoke and probably just the radiation itself just broke the chopper down and it crashed.
Yep, it crashed. So
by getting within that area directly over the fire.
Yep, and then Boris says, "Hey, is this the only way?" And Legasov says, "Yes." So he sends them the next choppers right on in, just from a different direction.
Yeah, upwind a little bit.
Yep. So there was 5 different types of helicopters used. The Mi-2, Mi-6, Mi-8, Mi-24, and the largest helicopter in the world, the Mi-26 Halo. So the first day of operations, the pilots and crew completed 96 missions, and then the next day, 24 hours after that, they completed double that. And the one that crashed was the Mi-8. Another interesting thing about those is after running all these missions and dumping all the sand, is they could never use those helicopters again because they're too radioactive. So they are sitting in a boneyard, just sitting there now.
It's pretty shocking to see all the people and everything that's involved for years to come. That can't be used.
Mm-hmm.
The site is definitely off limits. So it's a pretty crazy event.
Yeah, they had a small scene when the helicopters were coming in where they showed a dead deer just laying there in the woods. They didn't speak about it, but I think that's a pretty powerful piece about the impact of this to the environment.
Yeah, the environment, all the wildlife, and even the trees, I think were browning over top of that as well. The wind carried it. The Belarusian lab, I think it was 400 kilometers away.
Yes.
Where we started the episode at.
Yep.
And, they couldn't believe that Chernobyl could have caused this. It's too far away.
Yeah, they said it was too far away.
So just the wind, and I think the direction of wind at the time was towards Germany. And they, once the rest of the world found out, even they started to not let kids outside and close things down and protect people. And I remember Boris looked out the window and saw that right next door their kids are still going to school.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't notified anybody. And I think that's what, made him change his mind as far as evacuating Pripyat
Yep.
and starting to, get things in motion to contain this and save lives.
Yeah, so at the 36-hour mark is when we start seeing those evacuation buses roll in. We also see our scientist, Kamyak, arrive, and, she's got some information for him that they're looking at one piece of the puzzle and totally missing another. And she gives them some information. Hey, you're smothering the fire, which is good, but down there it's building up heat, and this is going to cause an explosion. And they said, "Oh yeah, we know about
Yeah,
that."
like I saw, if he kind of downplayed it at first. Like I've thought about all that.
You've got a month.
Yeah, you're not telling me anything new. But he, wasn't thinking, 2 steps ahead really.
Mm-hmm.
By smothering it, it's going to create lava because it's going to melt down, which he planned for, and then it's going to, get to these tanks, which he thought would have been mostly empty by now. But she brought it to the attention that, all the firefighters are spraying water on it. All the other tanks in the building, when things fail, they're going to drain down to that. And with how much water is in that, it's going to cause a thermal, explosion that's just going to decimate the whole area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's going to be worse than what we saw already.
They get back into the room with Gorbachev and tell him all this information. And I found it interesting that as they're explaining the explosion and the area that's going to be affected, everybody has like a binder with all this information. But, they're having to physically unfold these maps to see how big the explosion area was going to be.
Yeah, which is quite large.
Yeah, that was very impactful without having to say it, And at the same part, we see Boris again, and he didn't want to deliver any of this news. You could see him just hanging his head, and he really felt the weight of the impact of this issue, and yeah, he couldn't even speak in front of him.
It took some time for all the directors and everybody in charge to come to terms with the fact that this is really happening, and this isn't a 1 or 2 week cleanup thing. I mean, this is going to take years, hundreds of years or longer before, we might start to see the effects of the cleanup. This is a massive event that we can't just sweep under the rug. The rest of the world, not only did they find out, but they're really it affects everybody, not just us.
They told Gorbachev, we need your permission, and he said, what for? And they said, well, we need to send in 3 divers to open valves on these tanks so we can pump them out. And the people that go in there, they're basically committing suicide. And Gorbachev basically said, people have to make sacrifices.
Yeah.
He didn't tell them yes, but they
he
they
never
understood.
explicitly gave them, the okay, but he made it clear that 3 to save the lives of many is a necessity, that it's something that has to be done.
Yeah.
Go ahead and do it.
They go out and they ask for volunteers, and there's a group of about a dozen men that seem to be pretty well informed, and they know what's going on and what the risks are.
Yeah, they kind of survey the room. Some of the engineers and maintenance guys, they're asking some pretty harsh questions as far as, what's going to happen, what's involved. And he kind of gives them Boris gives them a nice speech to kind of set the mood straight. And yeah, 3 guys volunteer, and they show them suiting up in some rubber diving gear, and they send them in there to, do what they got to do in the water tanks. We'll get to the ending, but I like the way that this episode ended. It was very, very intense.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the last thing left, so yeah,
Yeah,
we can talk about
one thing, before we get to that, one thing that stood out when they actually did the evacuation is how calm everybody was. I noticed that there wasn't chaos happening. Everything was orderly. People were just walking to the buses. They had their belongings. There wasn't chaos.
Yeah, and when they were getting on the buses, they were checking in and checking off names on a list or writing down who was getting on.
Yeah, so that's one thing that stood out to me. I don't know if it's just the times or the culture that they lived in, or the information that they were told. Like, hey, we're moving you guys. I doubt they gave them the whole, levity of the situation, that this is life or death, So it was just really calm as they were leaving the city, and that struck me as unique. And also this, we had an original recording last episode of when the explosion happened, and I noticed there was a couple this time as well, a couple news reels they showed.
So those divers, they volunteer. So I have their names. So we have Alexis Ananenko. Once again, sorry guys for butchering these names. Russian is not something I speak very well. Valero Bespalov and Boris Baranov. So 3 incredibly brave men that went in to make this change to these tanks so that they can pump it out and hopefully save millions of lives.
Yeah, exactly. Knowing that it was a suicide mission, essentially, it takes a lot of courage to do that. So, yeah, leading up to the end of the episode, it shows them, traversing through the tanks and through the water. And they get to a part where the water's kind of bubbling up, symbolizing it's, really hot. It's getting to that point where it's going to flash. And all of a sudden, their meters start going off really fast. Their heart rates are going, their breathing is going, and it's getting to be really, intense. And then the flashlights go out and leaving them in just complete darkness.
Pitch black, yeah.
And then that's where the episode ends.
Yeah, that was a very eerie end to the episode. And once again, we have the beginning of the credits that are silent or very, very minimal music playing.
Yeah, it just, the tone of that scene was intense. And then just to end it in silence, it was
very impactful.
Very impactful.
Yeah, so we do see a little bit of glimpse of what's coming next week. We do see that the divers survived, and they're flying out of there, and they seem to be successful. And Legasov is looking for the source of the explosion. He explains it so that way this doesn't happen again at another nuclear facility.
Yeah, because they have the same design, at multiple places, and he doesn't want this to happen ever again, to make sure that whatever caused this, whether it was human error or, engineering error, that they can figure it out.
So what did you guys think about the episode? Did we get anything wrong on our recap? Go ahead and leave us a comment below.
Last week was huge for us.
Yeah, huge
This episode, it seems like a lot of people enjoyed it just as much as we did. Enjoyed, watching us do a recap on it. So thank you guys for watching. We are at Southport Media once again. And if you guys can subscribe, comment about anything that you guys want us to talk about or mention to us, we appreciate it.
Thanks for watching, and there's 3 episodes left. We'll see you the next 3 weeks. Thanks.
Cheers, everybody. Bye.